The cold clang of the prison gates echoed as Margaret Sinclair stepped out, her silver hair tied back in a neat bun, her eyes sharper than ever. 2 years ago, she was a wealthy woman living in her grand estate in Martha's Vineyard. Today, she stood with nothing but a worn coat and a fire inside her that had never burned hotter. She had been betrayed, set up by her own daughter, Lily, and Lily's new husband, Travis, an ex-con with a smile too slick and a past too dark. They took everything. Her fortune, her name, her freedom, but they made one mistake. They left her alive. Now she was back, and they didn't know it yet. They didn't know she was coming for them. And this time, she wasn't just a mother or a millionaire. She was a storm they didn't see coming. But to understand how a 65-year-old woman ended up locked away while her daughter and her ex-con husband sipped champagne in her mansion, we need to go back. Back to when things seemed normal. Back to when she still trusted the one person she should have feared the most. It started 2.5 years ago, on a warm spring morning. Margaret Sinclair had always lived a life many dreamed of. A self-made businesswoman who turned a small real estate firm into a national empire. With 2 marriages behind her and 1 grown daughter, Lily, Margaret was finally at peace. Her days were filled with brunches, charity galas, and sailing trips. She wasn't flashy, but she was respected, even feared by competitors. But Margaret had one soft spot, Lily. Lily had always been the delicate one, the dreamy-eyed child who never quite lived up to expectations. She tried her hand at everything, fashion design, acting, even starting a podcast, but nothing stuck. Still, Margaret gave her chance after chance. Money, connections, even a loft in downtown Boston. Anything to help her daughter find her place in the world. Then one day, Lily introduced her to Travis. He was charming in a rugged sort of way. Ex-military, he said, now working security for private clients. His handshake was firm, his voice smooth, and he called Margaret ma'am with a respectful nod. But Margaret had lived long enough to spot the signs. Travis had prison ink hidden beneath his dress shirt, scars on his knuckles, and eyes that lingered too long on her jewelry. She didn't like him. I don't trust him, she told Lily one night over wine. You don't trust anyone, Mom, Lily snapped. He's not perfect, but he loves me. And maybe that's what scares you. Margaret let it go. For a while. Then came the wedding. A quiet ceremony on the beach with only a few guests. Margaret didn't smile in a single photo. The papers called it a simple, sweet union. Margaret called it a mistake. Soon after, things began to shift. Margaret noticed little things, documents missing from her home office, a wire transfer she didn't authorize, questions from her staff about decisions she hadn't made. Lily was spending more time at the estate, claiming she wanted to bond with her mother. Travis started appearing in the background more often, helping the gardener, chatting with the cook, smiling his too white smile. One night, Margaret awoke to a faint clicking sound downstairs. She tiptoed out of her room, her robe wrapped tightly around her. She found Travis in her study, typing on her computer. I couldn't sleep, he said smoothly. Thought I'd do a little reading. Margaret didn't believe a word. The next day, she had her passwords changed. She started locking her office at night. But it was too late. 3 weeks later, the FBI showed up at her door. They had a warrant. Money laundering. Fraud. Embezzlement. Margaret thought it was a joke. Until they showed her the evidence. Offshore accounts under her name, fake documents with her signature, voice recordings of her allegedly planning illegal transfers. None of it was real. But it looked real. Too real. Her own lawyer, a man she had known for 15 years, looked her in the eye and said, Margaret, this doesn't look good. The trial was swift. The jury didn't see a victim. They saw a rich woman who thought she could play above the law. Every piece of fake evidence was perfectly timed, perfectly placed. Margaret sat in that courtroom, looking at her daughter across the aisle. Lily never once looked back. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Margaret didn't cry. She just stared at Lily. And Lily smiled. The first year in prison was the worst. Margaret, once surrounded by servants and private chefs, now shared a bunk bed with a woman named Carla who had stabbed her husband with a fork. She scrubbed toilets. She ate gray food. She kept her head down. But she never stopped thinking. She replayed every moment. Every warning sign she had ignored. Every time Lily had hugged her and slipped something from her purse. Every lie Travis told, and every laugh he shared with the staff. She thought about the house. Her company. Her legacy. All gone. She thought about revenge. By the second year, Margaret had changed. She worked in the prison library. She listened more than she spoke. She learned things, how certain people moved money without detection, how to trace fake accounts, how to read people in seconds. She read books on psychology, studied patterns of betrayal, watched every court case she could get her hands on. She wasn't the same woman anymore. Then one morning, a staff member pulled her aside. "There's something you should know," the woman whispered. That was the moment it all shifted. That's when Margaret stopped waiting. She started planning. And now, 2 years later, she was free. The court had overturned the conviction on newly discovered evidence. That's all the press release said. No one knew the truth. And no one knew what Margaret Sinclair was about to do next. Back in the early days before the fall, everything had felt picture perfect. Margaret remembered the spring gala she hosted just a few months before her arrest. The garden was lit with lanterns, the scent of jasmine in the air. She wore a silver gown, her hair curled, her diamonds catching the moonlight. Lily was there too, laughing with guests, introducing Travis as the love of her life. Margaret had tried to keep things civil, even tried making small talk with Travis. "So, what do you plan to do now that you're married?" she asked him. Travis smiled. "Whatever Lily dreams up, I'm here for it. We're building something big." At the time, she thought he meant a business. Or maybe a family. She didn't realize he meant her ruin. Later that night, as guests danced on the marble patio, Margaret stood alone on the balcony, looking out at the ocean. She felt it then, unease. The kind that slips in quietly and settles in your bones. She brushed it off. She shouldn't have. A week after the gala, she found her assistant crying in the hallway. When Margaret asked what was wrong, the girl just shook her head and left without a word. That was the last time Margaret saw her. Then came the strange bank alerts, the missing emails, her attorney brushing off her concerns. And then came the worst day of her life. The moment her wrists were cuffed. The moment the world believed she was a criminal. And as the officers led her away, Lily stood in the doorway of the estate, one hand on Travis's chest, her face blank. Margaret would never forget that. She would never forget the way Lily watched her go. Now, standing in the cold outside the prison, she held that image close. Because that image was the reason she was still alive. And it was the reason she was going to make them pay. She had spent 2 years in hell. But hell had made her sharper. And tonight, she was going back to the estate. Back to the place where it all began. She had no idea what she would find there. But she had a key. And what she discovered inside would change everything. The black sedan rolled to a stop just beyond the gates of the Sinclair estate. Margaret sat in the back seat, barely blinking as the iron bars came into view. Even after everything, her name was still etched on the brass plate at the front, Sinclair Manor. A legacy now smeared in scandal, held hostage by a daughter who once clung to her mother's hand during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't let go." Margaret stepped out slowly. The night was cool, the wind brushing her coat open. She took out the old key, one of the few things that hadn't been taken from her when she was arrested, and slipped it into the side entrance near the greenhouse. It clicked. The door creaked open. Silence. She stepped inside. The house was different now. Cold. Dim. The warm golden lighting she always insisted on had been replaced with sharp, modern LEDs. The portrait of her that once hung in the foyer was gone. In its place, a black and white photo of Lily and Travis, smiling like they owned the world. Margaret didn't pause. She moved like a ghost, careful not to trip the sensors she knew Travis had installed. She headed for the East Wing, her private quarters. The keypad had been changed, but she still remembered the override code. She had made Travis believe it was changed permanently, but she never gave up the real emergency access. Inside her old bedroom, everything was untouched, just locked up and forgotten. She walked to the hidden panel behind the bookshelf, pushed it open, and pulled out an old leather folder. Inside were the original documents, proof of ownership for certain properties, private letters from her attorney, a will she had never filed. And tucked in the back, her mother's diamond brooch. It wasn't valuable to anyone but her. She closed the panel, hiding everything in her coat. She didn't come back for comfort. She came back for fuel, for pieces of herself. As she turned to leave, she heard it. Footsteps. Not from the hallway, but from inside the room across the hall. Her heart stopped. No one should be there. She ducked into the shadows, just as a soft voice filtered out through the cracked door. "She's out. Are you sure we're safe?" It was Lily. Margaret's breath caught. She's got no proof. She's probably halfway to Canada, crying into a Bible, Travis replied. Margaret could almost hear the smirk in his voice. But she's dangerous, Lily whispered. You said she'd never get out. Well, Travis said. Then maybe we didn't bury her deep enough. A silence. Then Travis chuckled. If she shows up again, we'll handle it. Just like before. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. The door creaked as she backed away, careful not to make a sound. Her mind was already racing. They're hiding something else. Something they're still afraid of. She needed answers. She needed allies. She slipped out the side entrance and disappeared into the woods behind the estate, the wind now stinging her face. Her boots crunched over fallen leaves, each step heavier than the last. By the time she reached the edge of the woods, the sun was rising, and she knew where she had to go next. He was the only one who might still owe her something. Victor Maddox, an old enemy, and once a very close friend. Victor had been her competitor for decades, a ruthless broker with a private firm in Manhattan. He had tried to buy her out in the early days. She refused. Instead of fighting, they partnered on a massive resort deal 15 years ago and ended up making each other a fortune. But after a fallout over a failed project in Seattle, they never spoke again. Until today, Margaret took a bus to the city and waited outside his office in a raincoat, pretending to be a courier. When Victor came down for lunch, she stepped in front of him. His jaw dropped. You, he said. We need to talk, she replied. Somewhere private. Victor stared at her, still stunned. Then he gave a slight nod. Inside his sleek office, the view of the skyline behind him, he poured them both a drink. I thought you were locked up for good, he said. I was, Margaret replied. Until someone made a mistake. Victor studied her. Why come to me? Because you know people who can trace the kind of money Travis is hiding. Offshore. Dirty accounts. Maybe even your own former connections. He raised a brow. And what's in it for me? You get first rights to any property I take back. Every deal they stole from me. And you help me destroy them. Victor sat back. You always did come with fireworks. And you always liked lighting the match. He smirked. Fine. But this doesn't mean I like you again. I don't care if you like me, she said. I just need you to help me ruin them. Victor made a call. Within hours, his team started digging. Emails. Transaction records. Shell companies. That evening, one of his analysts brought in a folder. There's something weird here, she said. They opened a dummy charity in your name. Months ago, large donations moving through. All of it fake. Margaret's eyes narrowed. They used my name again? Victor handed her the folder. Looks like they're not done bleeding you. And then, the analyst paused. There's one more thing. She placed a photo on the table. Margaret froze. It was Lily, in a hospital room, holding a newborn baby. Margaret stared at the image, her mouth slowly falling open. She had a baby, she whispered. When? Victor looked confused. There's no record of a birth certificate. Not under her name. But this photo was pulled from a private server connected to one of Travis's Shell accounts. Hidden deep. Margaret's blood turned cold. What else had they been hiding? And why would they keep this a secret? Before she could speak, Victor's phone buzzed. He answered, listened for a moment, then held the phone out to Margaret. You're going to want to hear this. Margaret took it. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 2 years. Michael, her old estate manager. He was whispering, breathless. They're planning something. Tonight. You need to get here. Fast. Margaret's heart pounded. What is it? But Michael just repeated, come now. Before it's too late. The line went dead. Victor stood. I'll send a car. Margaret grabbed the folder, her coat, and headed for the door. Whatever was happening at the estate tonight was bad. But she was ready now. They didn't know she was alive in more ways than one. And when she walked back into that house again, she wouldn't be alone. Back in Martha's Vineyard, the sky darkened over the Sinclair estate. Inside, Travis pulled a large metal case from the basement floor. Lily stood over him, holding her arms. Are you sure about this? She asked. Travis grinned. She wants to come back? Then we'll bury her for real this time. He opened the case. Inside was a gun and a stack of forged passports. Outside, tires rolled to a stop just beyond the gate. Margaret stepped out of the black car. Her eyes locked on the glowing windows of the home she once ruled. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She walked straight up the driveway. And at that exact moment, a shot rang out. Somewhere inside the house. The gunshot cracked through the night like a thunderclap, sharp and sudden. Margaret ducked instinctively, her heart slamming against her ribs. The guards were gone. The gates had been left open, and now a gun had gone off inside her own home. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the side door, the same one she had used to sneak in before. Her shoes crunched over gravel as she moved through the hedges and up the stone path, her breath catching in her throat. She reached the entrance and eased it open slowly, silently. The interior was bathed in shadows. Not a single alarm went off. Too easy, she thought. They weren't expecting anyone to come back this fast. Inside, the house was quiet. Eerily quiet. The kind of silence that only came after violence. She moved through the hallway, following her instincts, until she reached the source of the sound, the study. The door was ajar. Margaret peered inside and froze. Michael, her old estate manager, was lying on the floor. Blood pooled beneath his shoulder. He was still breathing, barely. Margaret rushed in, falling to her knees. "Michael, what happened?" He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "They found out. I tried to warn you." He heard me on the phone. Margaret pressed down on his wound with trembling hands. "Who shot you?" Michael coughed, wincing. "Travis. He knew I'd called you. Said he wasn't taking chances anymore." "Where is he now?" Margaret asked. Michael's gaze shifted toward the back hall. "They're planning to disappear. Tonight. New IDs. Offshore accounts. They packed the cash already. Said they had to burn what's left." Margaret's blood ran cold. "What does that mean, burn what's left?" Michael coughed again, a small trickle of blood escaping his lips. "The files. Everything. They're going to erase it all. But there's something you need to see first. Go to the wine cellar. Behind the third rack. Hidden door." "I'm not leaving you here," Margaret said, grabbing a towel to press harder on his wound. "You have to," he rasped. "Go now." She hesitated only a second before rising. She pulled a heavy bookcase in front of the study door, a weak barrier, but enough to slow someone down, and ran. The wine cellar was 2 floors down. She moved fast, her mind racing. The house smelled of cedar and faint smoke. She reached the cellar and flipped the light. Rows of dusty bottles lined the walls. She walked past the first rack, then the second. Then she found it, the third one. A rack of aged Burgundy from the French estate she bought years ago. She pushed it aside, revealing a flat wooden panel in the wall. She ran her fingers over the wood. Click! A panel swung open. Inside was a small room, dark, cramped, and freezing cold. And at the back of the room, a metal cabinet. She opened it. Inside were files, old paper records, USB drives, and a few videotapes labeled in shaky handwriting, Project Eclipse. She didn't recognize the name, but as she flipped through the files, her heart started to pound. These weren't just business records. They were recordings of meetings, bank records tied to fake charities, photos of offshore account statements, and most chilling of all, pictures of Margaret's own face, altered, framed next to fake documents. They had built this scheme long before her arrest, long before the world knew. It wasn't just revenge. It wasn't just greed. It was a plan, years in the making, and she had no idea. Then she heard footsteps above. Fast. Heavy. They knew she was back. Margaret stuffed everything she could into her coat and ducked out through the servants' tunnel that led to the garden. She emerged into the cold night air just in time to see 2 black SUVs peeling out of the estate's back road. Gone. But not for long. Margaret rushed back to the study. Michael was still alive, barely. "I got it," she whispered, cradling his head. He smiled weakly. "Knew you would." Then his eyes rolled back. She felt for a pulse. It was gone. She sat back on her heels, stunned. One more life taken. One more name she'd never forgive them for. She made the call to Victor. "They're running," she said. "I found everything. It was bigger than I thought." Victor was quiet for a moment. "Where do you think they're going?" "Mexico. Maybe further. But they won't leave yet. Not without one last play. They've still got something. And they're planning to use it." Margaret returned to the city that night, the files now locked in a safety deposit box under an alias. She checked into a small hotel under the name Maggie Clay, her hair now tied tight under a scarf, her body wired with nerves. By morning, news of a break-in at Sinclair Manor hit the headlines. The press suspected vagrants. Margaret smiled bitterly. "Let them think that," she whispered. She didn't rest. Not yet. Victor's team started decoding the USB drives. One contained phone logs, hundreds of calls between Travis and a known financial criminal in Panama. Another file, buried deep, had voice recordings. Most were dull finance talk, but one made Margaret stop cold. A recorded call between Travis and Lily. It was dated just 2 weeks before Margaret's arrest. Lily, she'll never see it coming. She thinks I'm still just figuring things out. Pathetic. Travis, she'll learn. Too late. Lily, and when she's gone, everything's mine. She made me wait long enough. Click. The recording ended. Margaret stood by the window, the city buzzing below her. She had always known Travis was the rot. But hearing Lily, her Lily, speak those words? That was different. That was the real knife. And she didn't even cry. She couldn't afford to anymore. That afternoon, a new piece of information dropped. Victor burst into the room. You're not going to like this, he said. Margaret turned. They're not going to Mexico. She blinked. Then where? He placed a photo on the table. A grainy security cam image. Travis. At a private airstrip in Virginia. With Lily. And a baby. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a fluke. There was a child. And they weren't planning to run. They were planning to disappear entirely. New identities. New country. But first, they had to erase every piece of evidence that could tie them to their crimes. That included her. They're going to try to kill you, Victor said. Margaret nodded slowly. Let them try. And that's when her phone buzzed again. A blocked number. She answered. And froze. The voice on the other end was young. Shaky. Female. I know what they did, the voice whispered. I'm one of their staff. They don't know I'm calling you. Margaret's grip tightened. I want to help. But you have to come alone. Please. Who are you? I work for them. And I have something you need. Something they left behind. Margaret's heart pounded. Where? The girl hesitated. Then said one word. Georgia. Then the line went dead. Margaret turned to Victor. I'm going to Georgia, she said. Victor stepped forward. That's a trap. I know, Margaret said. But I'm going anyway. The Greyhound bus rumbled southward through the night, headlights flickering against winding roads and forgotten towns. Margaret sat near the back, her scarf pulled low, her coat zipped high. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Not since the call. Georgia. That one word had changed everything. The staff girl, whoever she was, knew something. Something Lily and Travis hadn't planned on being found. And Margaret had learned long ago that the biggest cracks in any scheme came not from enemies, but from the people you thought were beneath you. Staff, drivers, assistants. She got off the bus at a sleepy town called Mableton, just west of Atlanta, a place where nothing big ever happened. The kind of town where people waved at each other from porches. But behind one of those front doors, someone was keeping a secret that could bring it all down. Margaret walked to the gas station where the girl had told her to wait. An old payphone sat near the side wall, rusted and barely working. At 11:06 p.m., it rang. She answered. Red Barn. End of Timberline Road. Look for the fence with 3 posts. Click. The call ended again. She hired a local driver who didn't ask questions, paying him extra cash to wait outside the dirt path as she walked the last stretch alone. Timberline Road was more forest than street. Owls hooted in the darkness, and pine needles cracked underfoot. She found the Red Barn, just like the girl said, weathered and leaning, with peeling paint and a broken window. She stepped inside and called out, It's Margaret. I came alone. A shadow moved. Then a figure emerged from behind a stack of hay bales. She couldn't have been older than 20. Thin, nervous, hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She wore an old Sinclair staff polo under a denim jacket. My name is Jessica, the girl said. I worked in the estate. Kitchen staff. Nobody noticed me. Margaret gave a single nod. Why now? Jessica wrung her hands. Because I know what they did to you. I heard Lily on the phone one night, laughing, talking about planting the files, how you'd never recover. And I saw things, papers, accounts, things I wasn't supposed to see. Margaret stepped closer. What do you have? Jessica handed her a small manila envelope. Inside were printed screenshots, photos of emails between Lily and Travis, talking about the fake accounts and timing the drop of fabricated documents just days before Margaret's arrest. One email even referenced a contact inside the legal team, someone who had helped steer the trial to end faster than it should have. But the last page was the worst. A scanned passport. Lily Sinclair, age 34. Travis Clay, age 41. And the child, Margot Clay, age 1. Margaret's knees nearly buckled. They named her after me, she whispered. Jessica nodded slowly. I don't think Lily even wanted the baby. Travis did. But it's like they made her as part of the story. Like they knew it would soften their image when they disappeared. Where are they now? Margaret asked. Jessica's eyes darted toward the dark trees beyond the barn. They're still close. Maybe 3 hours away. In a safe house outside Macon. They've been laying low, waiting for their new papers. But something happened. They're panicking. Travis thinks you're still alive. Margaret gave a tight smile. He's right. Jessica hesitated. They're planning to leave tonight. A private plane from a field near Dublin. They're going for good. They've already wired the rest of the money out of the country. Then we still have time, Margaret said. I just need the location. Jessica pulled out a hand-drawn map. Margaret took it, tucking it into her coat. Then Jessica's face changed. Eyes wide, breath shallow. Margaret turned. A black SUV had pulled up just outside the barn. No headlights. Then the barn door exploded open. Travis. He stepped in, holding a pistol. Well, he said, aiming it straight at Margaret. A little rat reunion. Jessica screamed. Travis grabbed her by the arm and yanked her behind him. Did you think I wouldn't find you? He snarled. You're not as clever as you think. Margaret raised her hand slowly, her eyes on his gun. Killing me now won't fix anything. The files are out there. You shoot me, and everything still burns. Travis grinned. See, that's where you're wrong. I already know who helped you. That little snake Victor? We'll deal with him too. And as for you, I should have finished you off 2 years ago. Then why didn't you? Margaret asked. His eyes darkened. Because Lily wasn't ready. She still had that tiny bit of guilt. But it's gone now. Jessica tried to run. Travis swung the gun. Margaret didn't think. She launched herself at him. The gun went off. A flash. A deafening bang. Then silence. Jessica screamed. Travis stumbled back, groaning. The bullet had hit the side of the barn wall. Margaret, knocked to the floor, reached for a rusted pitchfork nearby. But Travis kicked it away, towering over her, his mouth curled into a sneer. Any last words? Then a second shot rang out. This one didn't miss. Travis jerked, his chest exploding in red. He dropped to the ground with a thud. Dead. Jessica gasped. Margaret turned slowly. Standing in the shadows was Lily, holding a smoking pistol. Tears streaked her cheeks. I didn't come here to help him, she whispered. I came to stop him. Margaret stared, stunned. Lily took a step forward. I couldn't do it anymore. The lies. The pretending. I didn't even want the money anymore. But he said if I turned on him, he'd kill the baby. Margaret stood shakily. You named her after me, she said softly. Lily nodded. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she whispered. And I knew if she had your name, maybe someone would remember what was good. Silence fell between them. Jessica slipped out the back door, running into the woods for help. Margaret walked over to her daughter. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then Lily collapsed into her arms, sobbing. I'm sorry, she cried. I was so lost. Margaret didn't answer. Not yet. Because she knew the worst wasn't over. Somewhere out there was still the fake charity. The accounts. The corrupt legal insider. And the baby. Margaret stepped back, looking her daughter in the eyes. Where is she? She asked. Lily hesitated. She's safe. With someone I trust. But if we don't move fast, the people Travis worked with, they'll come for her too. Margaret's voice was calm, sharp as ice. Then we go get her. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about blood. About legacy. And for the first time in 2 years, Margaret Sinclair had her daughter back. But that didn't mean forgiveness. It meant they had one final mission. And the storm wasn't over. Not yet. The safe house was hidden in a quiet rural town outside Savannah. One of those sleepy little places with swaying moss trees, rusted mailboxes, and porches that sagged from generations of waiting. Margaret, Lily, and Jessica reached it just before dawn. The sky was turning gray, the wind sharp and heavy with the scent of pine. Inside the house, it was warm, peaceful, and in the corner, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket, was a baby girl. Lily moved first, quietly kneeling by the crib. Her voice cracked when she said her name. Margot. The baby stirred, cooed softly, and reached out toward her mother. Lily picked her up, tears dripping down her cheeks. Margaret stood behind her, silent. This child, her granddaughter, a living reminder of both betrayal and the bloodline that somehow still connected them. She has your eyes, Lily said, looking up at her mother. And your stare, that look that says you're already 5 steps ahead. Margaret didn't smile. I'm going to make sure she never has to learn the things I did, Lily added. Margaret's voice came low, almost a whisper. Then help me finish this. They didn't have much time. Victor called that afternoon. The people Travis worked with, they know he's dead. They're closing the accounts, shredding files. They're going to erase it all. If we don't act now, everything disappears. Margaret met Lily's eyes. You ready? Lily nodded. Let's burn them before they bury us. What followed was a firestorm. Margaret and Victor released the documents Jessica had provided to a group of independent investigative reporters, not the usual press. The story exploded across the country. YRS and ex-con plotted to frame billionaire matriarch, stole millions in fraud and identity laundering. But that was just the headline. What followed in the article was worse. Real estate fraud. Offshore accounts linked to illegal arms dealing through shell charities. Insider manipulation of Margaret's legal team. A fake conviction tied to bribed officials. Bank statements. Phone logs. Photos. The weight of evidence was undeniable. And the public? Hungry for blood. The media swarmed. News vans lined the Sinclair estate. Former employees came forward. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from Travis and Lily's donations. The state reopened Margaret's case fully. Within days, she was cleared not just legally, but publicly. Margaret Sinclair was no longer a disgraced billionaire. She was a wronged woman who had returned from the dead, and she was about to take her empire back. The final blow came when Margaret revealed the sealed recordings. Travis and Lily planning the scheme, discussing every manipulation in chilling detail. Margaret released them during a live interview, her voice steady, her expression steel. They thought I was too old to fight back, she said. Too broken. But you don't survive 65 years in this world by folding when you're cornered. You survive by planning your next move. Quietly. Precisely. The public ate it up. But behind the scenes, Margaret was making more moves. She contacted every board member of Sinclair Holdings. One by one. Not begging. Not threatening. Just reminding them who built it. She took back the company in 2 weeks. They voted unanimously. As for Lily, she stayed out of sight with Margot. The media hounded her at first, but Margaret made a quiet deal with the press to leave the baby out of it. She's innocent, she told them. Unlike the rest of us. There was one final thing Margaret needed to do. She returned to the prison where she had lost 2 years of her life. Not as an inmate, but as a guest speaker. She stood before a group of women in gray jumpsuits, many of whom knew her name from the news. I was here too, she said, and I swore I'd never come back. But I realized something. Some of you were thrown away by people who said they loved you, just like I was. And if you ever get the chance to come back from that, do it with fire. Applause thundered through the walls. Margaret left with her head held high. Later that month, on a warm summer evening, she sat on the porch of her rebuilt estate. Lily sat beside her, quiet, holding baby Margot. Jessica, now working as Margaret's personal assistant, came outside with iced tea. The latest numbers just came in, she said, handing Margaret a tablet. Sinclair Holdings is up 18%. The board's smiling again. Margaret took a sip and set the tablet down. She looked at the horizon, the sky a blazing orange. You know, she said softly, they always said revenge is a dish best served cold. But they were wrong. Jessica raised an eyebrow. It's best served calculated, thoughtful, and with witnesses. Lily chuckled bitterly. Margaret turned to her daughter. We'll never be the same, she said. You know that, right? I know, Lily replied. But we can try, Margaret added. For her. They looked at the baby. Margot babbled something and smiled, her tiny hand reaching up toward the sky. Margaret smiled, just slightly. You'll have a better life, she whispered. Not because of money, not because of privilege, but because her grandmother had lived, had endured, had come back from the edge and made the whole world listen. And though justice had taken 2 long years, it had finally come home.